King of Podcasts, proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Now please welcome your host, a traditional and digital media professional with over 25 years of experience, including the last 15 years in podcasting. Here is the King of Podcasts. This is my final podcast for 2019, of which overall I will have completed 163 podcasts of my own. 76 on the wrestling side, 52 for the Broadcasters Podcast, this one right here, and my When I'm Not Podcasting Umbrella Series, which I did 36. Maybe there's another one coming up before the end of the year. I don't know yet. A lot of work. But above everything else, wrestling, I do a wrestling podcast because it is a guilty pleasure. And it's a great place for me to go ahead and just talk about what I think about wrestling in general. And it's a nice place to go. And I like how there are certain people out there that are podcasters or responders. They just do YouTube videos or the like, that like to also delve into other areas of their own expertise. But for me, the Broadcasters Podcast, more than anything else, after completing the second year of this podcast, it's not just a passion project. I mean, it's me being investigative, finding facts, understanding the media industry more than I ever have before. Because all I had before I did this podcast was just the experience that I've had. And researching and doing all the work that I do behind the scenes to prepare for this show, I put in a lot of work. And I do quite a few interviews, which I've done this year. And I'm really happy and proud of all the ones I did. I think we've had a really good perspective. For those of you that have listened to this program, we've really gone a different spectrum when it comes to perspectives. And most importantly, this show, since I started it, the reason I first created it was the idea of really talking about the conforming culture, which has always been around with media in general. But it's gotten so bad, and there are so many other underlying forces that are really destroying what at one point was still very creative and very good. Because out of all the bad that we might get, all the corporate, misconstrued, crappy content we get that goes into the mainstream, one thing that still stands out was there were still certain things that broke out that really were creative and acknowledging real praise, and like we would say during the Oscar season, for your consideration worthiness, it really is. And we still get that kind of content through all of our music, movies, TV, and radio. But it becomes tougher and tougher for the content creators to get their just dues. And for us as consumers, as viewers, as those that are looking to be entertained and informed, we need to make sure that we hold all these entities accountable. And that's what I wanted to be as a media watchdog. And in so many different areas, we see all of that. And that's one thing that why I've wanted to go and chronicle that at all times. Talking about being creative, not corporate, well, that's when I first thought was the original direction. But the truth is, I needed to expand that this year to really encompass all broadcasters. Because in the real crux of everything, we are all broadcasters. Podcasters are broadcasters. YouTube responders, they're doing their videos, they're broadcasting. So it's not just the broadcasting idea of being in a part of a medium. It's that we are all broadcasting to other people some kind of message or some kind of entertainment or something else that's there that is supposed to engage others in a broader base. That's the idea. And so my show, this program, is to support all broadcasters. But in the direction that cultural, political correctness, social conformity, all these things that are hurting and not helping the direction that we're supposed to be having to really creating great content, it's starting to come into light and it's getting to be too much. And I don't like where we're going with all this. Some of the things that we see now, with the changes that happen, obviously in this corporate, social, cultural times, so many things are happening here that are affecting what we are getting as mainstream media, what we're getting as broadcast content. That's what you have to keep in mind. The digital transformation, the digital evolution is changing a lot of things. But what needs to happen is we need to keep the conversation going about, even if we're getting the change now, that we're going to be having a bigger spectrum of places to go with our content where we might not have to pay for it, that we don't have to have other people telling us where we can broadcast our content and what the content can be, that we have places to go to produce ourselves, to monetize ourselves, and to get our message, whatever kind of message we want, it can be conveyed and found and discovered. But we're having a lot of issues with censorship. We're getting a lot of issues with social, cultural, corporate conformity. And conformity only kills creativity. And that's the biggest problem. And that's what I'm afraid of. And that's what I've talked about through every story I talk about on this program. And going into next year, I have talked about it all year. And the reason why is because of what happened now. I talked about this time last year, the last episode I did before I dropped off for the new year, which I didn't take a week off. I could tell you that the issues with the trade unions were going to be significant, that we might have a real issue coming down the line because the streaming media that has come into play in television, it's now here. What music already went through, because there were no strikes, there were no labor disputes so much to the point. There were changes that were good for radio and for music when it comes to royalties, when it comes to calling out payola, when it comes out to finding more options and routes for independent creators to get their product out there. But the fight continues because there is still a stranglehold in establishment media in many different respects. When it comes to music, the radio stations are still being held by corporate hands for the most part. And those that are local can only get so much of a presence. So it's a fight that has to continue to be fought. And that's most important for me, is I am here as an advocate for those that want real free radio, that want radio to be for the people as it was before, and to find a way that people can make money, but then also give people what they want. That's most important. And so I'm going to go after the Bob Pittons of the world and the others that are out there that are just languishing and cheering with private equity at their backside to be able to do what they want and become all these ingenues, these visionaries, supposedly, when they're not. Okay? They are corporate puppets. That's what's most important. When it comes to the movies, movies and television are in the same vein, because you have to look at digital streaming. Yes, it is a new place, and we're in the Wild West right now. And a lot of new players are coming into the mix. And so the stranglehold that Netflix had for a long time is hurting. And you know what? They can't help themselves. They deal with certain content that gets controversy. And they get other programming that they can't hold on to anymore. And new opponents are at their behest right now, spending billions and billions of dollars, which in turn has forced Netflix to spend billions of dollars of their own to put out content. And that might be good for some people, but remember, the people that are paying for this probably are not paying the share that Netflix would hope that they would be getting for their product. Keep that in mind. They would hope to get more money off of you for what they're giving you. But this is where cable still has a hold. People are still cutting the cord, but the biggest problem we're going to have is, number one, where's that content going to be coming from? Because people are paying for content, getting the content to the streaming services. But then the labor unions, everything comes up to that. Will the pipeline get shut down? Will the spigot be turned off for a significant amount of time because of a growing number of organizations that are up to be negotiating? We already know the Writers Guild and the talent agents are already a battle, and they have continued to battle now since April to now The Screen Actors Guild, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, their contract is coming up as well. Then you have the AMPTP, the Motion Picture and TV Producers. Other organizations are going to be there as well. What I'm going to be looking to do on this program is to focus on the unions and focus on the disputes, because I want to get inside and find out the understanding of what's happening here, what is holding things up, what can be done for things to go ahead and move forward in the negotiations for everybody so that everybody's going to be happy. So I've made a reach out to get guests that can either attest to how this deals with things in the labor unions, who can speak about it, maybe some legal counsel that can also kind of help give us an understanding and give us some perspective as to where things are going to be going. Because the content that people look forward to in movies and television is at risk, significant risk. Now, there might be content, as we've talked about on the show, where certain movie and TV studios, networks, and whatnot have prepared for this. But that does not mean that they should not be worried about what's going to happen, because that's a lot of mouths to feed. And so you have to ask yourself, what's going to happen here? Are we going to be afraid that programming is going to get stifled here? Because that's what we're going to be seeing pretty soon. And I'm afraid of that. And I hope all of you realize what's going to happen here. We're going to have that problem. And we've already seen the effect of it going through before. Now, there's a reason why certain shows or certain programs, you're just basically taking an offshoot of something else, or rehashing or rebooting something, whatever it is, or just creating sequels of the same projects. New universes that get built, and then let's just create another movie off of it and cash grab, cash grab, cash grab. So when you ask yourself about some of these certain outlets that are trying to create new content, the other problem is the right content coming up to the forefront? Are we getting certain content because of who you know, what you know, and the wrong kind of content is getting to the forefront, which is very intersectional, social justice, politically correct, that people might not want to watch? Because we're seeing, obviously, certain content as woke is not working. And there are certain projects that can do that, of course. But that doesn't mean every project needs to be forced upon the mainstream public, that we need to see content that is trying to force propaganda, force a narrative that we do not subscribe to or agree to. And because that kind of content is only being accepted and absorbed by a minority, when the majority of content creators want to be able to create something else that doesn't have to give that kind of message, that just entertains, informs, and enlightens people. That's what we want in our media. That's what all of us should want. So I got a couple of headlines that we're going to talk about here on the program tonight. I also have part 2 of my interview with Ann Liguori, the legendary sportscaster, and going into more of her career and a lot of things that she's doing now in a charitable, philanthropical sense. We're going to talk to her about that on the second part of the interview tonight. And then I don't know if I'll have an interview set up for next week, because I am starting to go ahead and set things up for some new interviews coming up after the new year. So when we get to the next couple episodes, we probably will be interview free as I start setting up some more interviews and getting those scheduled and recorded. So I'll get some of those lined up. I had a good list of those to the later part of the year. I just need to go and set it up again. But I wanted to leave some room to go ahead and start talking about some of the things that are going to be coming up as the new year comes along. And even though this is the last week of the year, or at least last week of this podcast, going before we get into 2020, the next episode, there is still news going on, which a lot of things actually happen after Christmas, that a certain couple of things might actually happen underneath the headlines that people don't even realize. Number one, when it comes to radio, there are always changes to formats. So that's a fun, interesting thing if you're into that. I already saw there's a station that changed from Christmas to a new format here in town. And, it's nice to go and see what some of these companies are trying to do to create formats where they're just basically rehashing a format that might work for something else. Or maybe they're trying something experimental or new. But one of the stations I have here in West Palm Beach, where I'm at, Market 47, they are trying to experiment with the new rock stations coming on board. Not necessarily new rock, but it's a kind of a mainstream rock format, which encompasses 70s and now, but it's not so much I guess you could say, a classic rock format. It's trying to just do more of a album-oriented, something where it feels like a station that if you would have kept it as a regular rock station in the 70s or the 80s, then it would be what it would sound like now, is kind of the idea. It's trying to really put everything together and not just put a classic rock tag on it, I guess is what it's trying to talk about. The station is referring to itself as giving the finest rock, so I'm not sure what that means, but I'll give it a shot and listen to it. I want to see what some of these stations try to do. It's a smaller programmer. Maybe it'll do well. It's called Surf 92.5 and 101.7. It's a couple of translators they have out there. They're trying to make something good out of. And it's based off of WSVU AM 960, I believe. That's the original station that was on. So, see how that works. So, a couple headlines to get into right now. And one of the first stories I'm going to talk about is a New York Times story. Now, I don't like to get into anything political, as you know, because there's a lot of shows you can find that will talk about that. Obviously, media criticism and the politics. The only thing I really delve into are not so much the content, but the outlets that provide that content. We have talked extensively. You might remember our interview with Nicole Jordan, where we talked about digital media taking a hit because a lot of different places are not able to sustain because of unions that are being brought up, because unions basically just destroy newspapers and destroy publications. And the way journalism has actually acted as well, where there's a lack of investigative journalism, we now have this journalistic sense where we're basically just going for clickbait. That's been pretty obvious this year. Well, David Brooks writes an op-ed in the New York Times, and I thought it was an interesting story. I'm going to bring it up to you now. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but there's a few things I want to point out that he actually brings up. The story is called "The Media is Broken, and Not for the Reasons You Think." Now, he starts off mentioning that those of us in journalism primarily do one thing: cover events, reporting and opining about events, and a lot of the events we cover are decisions. The internet has sped up the news cycle. Now we put more emphasis on covering the last event that just happened, but it's still mostly events. Now, along the story, he also mentions that events don't seem to be driving politics. Increasingly, sociology is. Now, in the story, he tries to say, do you want to predict how a certain region is going to vote in a presidential race? Discover who settled the region in the 17th and 18th centuries. If the settlers were from the East Anglia section of Britain, then that region is going to probably go Democratic. If the settlers were from the north of Britain, they would likely vote for Donald Trump. So there was this whole kind of scenario he's trying to bring up. But again, it's political. I'm going to pass all of that. Now, they want to go into politics being talking about as a rural versus urban issue, which I'm not going to bring up here. I want to go a little bit farther into it. Down the line, he talks about that he's curious how to know how lenses get crafted. For example, intersectionality is a lens that was created by theorists decades ago and is now a way of seeing that many people use to organize their view of reality. How did that happen? And then he talks about he's curious to know how you could change another person's lens. Can you do it by writing and talking, or do you have to move her to a different place and immerse her in a different reality? Let's stop right there. Why does it matter about changing a person's opinion? Okay, now you want to go ahead and offer a different perspective that will change somebody's mind, or give them a little more, or let somebody entertain, debate, or discourse the idea. And maybe they might see a different perspective if you offer facts and evidence to support your claim. That might be one thing, but they're talking about writing or talking to move somebody to a different place and immerse them in a different reality, as if there's something wrong with the reality they're in. That's a bigger problem. So that's propaganda. That's trying to push. So you have a propaganda you want to go ahead and create, you want to go ahead and foster, and you want to convey to somebody, but they're not accepting it because of where they might live and how they might live their lives. So it's as if you need to move them. No, you don't need to move them. You just need to let them know. You want to talk to somebody about it, you talk to somebody about it. But you do not try to, you want to convince the argument? Okay, convince. And persuade, that's fine too. But if there's a point where this writer is talking about trying to go ahead and make the person realize some kind of reality, that they're immersed in a different reality. Well, there's something wrong with that. And that's a bigger problem. He doesn't talk about the fact of how the media is broken with the fact that they're not in the business of opinion editorial. That is not their main focus. It's news. It's gathering stories. Covering events is bullshit. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter about just the events. Because you can go to the events, anybody can go to the events, and they can get what they want out of that. And you can ask certain questions that might get a particular perspective you're looking for. But who gives a shit about that? How about actually covering other things? There are things around the world where there's people that actually see events. So it doesn't matter if all these different people need to be at a certain event at one time and we have to cover it. No. Find about things that are going on within the event, outside of the event, and how about other things that are going on with life? Now, in the story, David Brooks here continues to say that the big difference for those of us in media is that the main story is not only where the decision makers are creating events, it's also, and maybe more so in the eyes doing those, the perceiving. Again, why does it matter about the decision makers? And why does it matter that the people that are the decision makers, you're talking about leaders of state. You're talking about people in power, in positions of power. But what he's not talking about are the people that have power as well to persuade and convince and to overwhelm said person in power to make them realize they're wrong. Okay? There is an autonomy that we as people in the media, we should have. We should be able to go and hold, first of all, our leaders accountable, hold people that hold power accountable, and those that report the news, they should be held accountable as well. There's no question to that. This is another paragraph that just really is stupid. Obviously, he says, in this era, it's even more important to have a news organization that is ideologically, culturally, and geographically diverse, so you can surface and explore the different unconscious ways groups see. Okay. You don't need a group to be natural. You don't need the organization to be ideologically, culturally, geographically diverse. No, just get people to know how to write and know how to find the stories. Send them places. Send them to the spots that are ideologically, culturally, geographically diverse. You don't need to surface. You should explore. Send reporters out in the field. Have them work on it. They should not be looking at Twitter trying to find a story. Or social media finding some clip that will be certain clickbait that will work out for a story that they're going to go and publish. No, that's not the way that works. And then David Brooks talks about it's also important to ask different questions. It's not enough to simply ask people's opinions through polls and interviews. No, not ask different questions. How about finding the answers? I just don't get where this writer thinks that he's really going to be standing out here and he's going to just have some really great points said. Now, one of the comments that are put in this article is actually putting up a really good point. I like where they point the point. Lynn from New York, she writes that if the media covered government and policy rather than treating politics as a sport with those opposing teams, then people might well begin to understand the effect of votes on specific legislation on their lives and think of substance rather than reacting to labels. Her point is, she says, only a few reporters seem interested in substance rather than entertainment. Bingo. She also says, yes, the media is broken. There used to be courses called Politics and Government where people learned about government, but now it is all covered through the lens of politics, and politics as if it were a team sport. In fact, actually makes mention that the Times political reporter might have been a former sports reporter. So yes, it's like a competition. And then there's another commenter named Steve Williams from Palo Alto, California, and I think he hits this on the money. He says, quote, I always thought that news reportage was about facts, events that have a who, what, when, and where attached to them. Mr. Brooks talks about predictions and opinions. This is speculation. There was a time when a news article was 80% facts and 20% interpretation of facts, or meaning. Now it's the other way around. 20% facts, 80% speculation. So much so, it is difficult to know where the news pages and the opinion columns begin. And let's be clear, all media outlets engage in this practice. Bravo. He's absolutely right. That is the problem we have with media today. And I couldn't agree more with what was said. That was a story I thought that really stood out and made a real big information. Again, all the stories that I ever talk about here on the podcast, I have them in the description, so you can go and check them out for yourself. If you're unable to read them on the YouTube page where you can watch it, watch my show, youtube.com/jbrasco951. Not watch, but, listen to it on YouTube. I have it on the website, broadcasterspodcast.com. All the links to the stories that I talk about are in the description there. And I also repurpose them over on my Twitter and Facebook pages. Just look for @King of Podcasts on Twitter and Facebook.com/King of Podcasts. It's all there. And also the links are on the website, broadcasterspodcast.com. Just wanted to give you the heads up of that. Okay, another story that actually happened last week that I'm going to get a chance to go and talk about was a story from Billboard.com talking about why there's no magic bullet solution to the music industry's distribution problem. So the biggest problem there is warehouse woes, shrinking order sizes, and the lure of Amazon when it comes to distributing music. So that's the biggest issue when it comes to brick and mortar retailers or indie store owners. So as CD shipments have shrunk, so have order sizes. And even without the addition of inventory from groups like Warner Music Group, there are warehouses that are unable to deal with the changing marketplace and are already poised to become a slow-moving problem waiting to befall the industry. Another thing is there are certain companies that are getting direct shipments to their stores, which is also creating a bigger problem for some of these companies. So just trying to get music out there to people, if you want to still go ahead and buy it, it's becoming a bigger problem. Now, beyond problems in supplying stores and wholesalers with inventory, consumer artist websites and touring acts needing merchandise to sell on the road have suffered in the same vein. So what's happening is some artists are getting their product in stores, but it's stunning that product to the artist for them to sell at their shows is not getting to them. So merchandise is becoming a bigger problem. Like, besides the fact that music can be distributed virtually, and you can do it online through a cloud, you can go to any streaming service you want, but buying physical units and buying merchandise of the artists is becoming a problem now because of the money it's going to cost to do it, because they're not getting it out in bulk, which used to cover the costs. That's the whole point of all this. Now, one of the stories that mentions here is a company called Direct Shot. And what happened was they took on distribution of Warner Music Group and its alternative distribution alliance titles around the same time and began direct shipping to individual Target stores instead of one huge shipment to the chain's warehouse. And they haven't been able to handle it. So if you want to find music to whichever stores you want to find them at, it's becoming harder to get that music than ever just getting it shipped physically. Which, I don't know how big of a problem it might be, but people trying to go and distribute music like they used to be, well, there's also a backlash to the fact that people don't want to have their music. They don't want to find music they have to find as a particular product they have to go and put into a machine to play it. People don't want to do it anymore. And I think these kind of things we're hearing about are just a way of life. People are not going to go ahead and do what they did before, where they take a CD or a cassette or an 8-track or whatever to go listen to music. It's not the same anymore. Vinyl is a different story, but then again, it's also older music, not so much new music, I would imagine. That's what it looks like for me anyway. Now, one other story I want to go and bring up as well that I didn't get a chance to talk about when it comes to radio that I thought was actually kind of interesting is media ownership rules because of what's going on with that. Now, here's what we talked about back in September, that there was a U.S. court that dealt a setback to the FCC to push to revamp media ownership rules. A federal appeals court struck an effort to loosen U.S. media ownership rules. So one of the rules that was trying to be changed was eliminating the 42-year-old ban on cross-ownership of a newspaper and television station in a major market, making it easier for media companies to buy additional TV stations in the same market, and for local stations to jointly sell advertising time, and for companies to buy additional radio stations in some markets. So more deregulation. And that was the one thing I was really worried about, is that are we going to have continued deregulation that's just going to go ahead and take more and more companies away from, here's the idea, because the Federal Appeals Court was talking about how the rules changes did not adequately consider the effect of its sweeping rule changes and how it would have on ownership of broadcast media by women and racial minorities. I'm not worried so much about that. I'm worried for the fact that everybody has a chance to go ahead and buy a station and be able to build from it, and that there are stations that, if they're not being served well to the public, that are corporately owned, then I want those stations to, let's get them divested. Let's change the rules so that, there's an even playing field. I mean, that's where I wanted to come down to anyway, because I honestly think there's some stations that would do much better if they actually held on to a couple of stations and put all their effort into it and monetize those stations, than just holding on to a bunch of stations that they really don't want and not making money off of them and not giving anybody else the chance and opportunity to do something with them. That's where I go with that argument. Well, the FCC decided to go ahead and reinstate their ownership rules. So their original rules that vacated and remanded the Commission's incubator order of 2018 and an order on reconsideration. So the rules that were put in place back before that were under consideration of being changed will stay status quo. All right, so what does that mean for everybody? Let me try to explain that all to you then real quick. The rules today when it comes to newspaper and broadcast station cross-ownership. We talked about that. National TV ownership does not limit the number of TV stations a single entity may own, and under the caveat that their group does not reach no more than 39% of all U.S. TV households. That ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC can never merge with each other. That's another rule. That's dual TV network ownership. Then another one is any entity is permitted to own up to 2 TV stations in the same designated market area. And that's it. 2 stations. And then when it comes to ownership restrictions, it's based on a sliding scale that varies by size of market. So in markets with at least 20 independently owned media voices, an entity can own up to 2 TV stations and 6 radio stations. Markets with 10 independently owned media voices, an entity can own up to 2 TV stations and 4 radio stations. In the smallest markets, an entity can own 2 TV stations and 1 radio station, and that's what happens. So they were going to try to go ahead and break it open and get more loosening of the rules that's already in place and create more corporate ownership and make more stations get bought by other companies that are just going to waste it. And that's what I didn't want to have happen. So I consider this as a victory. I'm happy the rules are going to stay status quo. I would like to see them tightened instead. That would be better for all, so that everybody gets a chance. I'm not taking people away from buying stations, but you know what? If you're going to buy a station, if you're going to do something with a product that's there, that is the public airways, then do something with it. Do not just let it sit there and do nothing. That's what I'm really worried about. Final story before we get to Ann Liguori and my closing interview with her, my conclusion of my interview with her. Streaming will get easier, cheaper, and at some point, companies need to start making money. This is from Engadget. So this is a look into 2020 when it comes to streaming media. So there's a lot of new streaming media outlets out there, and piracy is starting to roar back into the mainstream. We're starting to learn about that. So each backing company has different reasons to want to take a bite out of the video pie, but they're pumping millions or billions into these services and the content for them. The expansion won't slow down until the bills are due, and that's when we're going to see the biggest problem. Because, yes, we're seeing certain companies that are, giving a really good purchase price, but they're going to have to bring their price up pretty soon. So Disney Plus offered a $6.99 per month price, And also said its app would include downloads in HDR. It's a company that's prepared to lose $1 billion by pushing their service next year. And the losses won't peak until 2022. And it's not hoping to break even until 2024. So Disney is going to take a hit for doing this, but for their own sake, they're a big enough company that they're not going to fail by doing this. So they're going to basically try to wait out the rest of the competition. Quite a move for them, but they have the bucks to do it. Then you have AT&T's plan for HBO Max. They're going to invest $2 billion next year. All the projection, it'll be a money loser until 2025. So again, think about this. Some of these companies, they're projected to lose for the next 5 to 6 years. Tim Cook said some interesting comments back in October. He says, Apple TV Plus is a gift to Apple users, explaining that the free year that he's offering will come packed with some of the company's new devices. $1 billion handouts will pay for a lot of Baby Yodas, dragons, and episodes of Friends at the Star. But beyond the hassle of figuring out which service is worth paying for, we're staring down the prospect of paying a lot more in the future when some of these services need to start making money. Netflix is the biggest one. I've talked about this on the program. They're using some complex accounting strategies to keep up with deep-pocketed competition. And what do you know about debt financing? Which, again, they're going to start having to deal with private equity at some point because they can't keep up things. Now, they've raised their prices 4 times going back to 2014. But Netflix can only sign up so many people. Content isn't getting any cheaper to license or make. And while creating original shows and movies means it has more control, it also requires a lot more money up front. So how do you get more money without drastically increasing the number of subscribers? You got to raise prices. Keep that in mind, folks. That's going to happen. And so for those of you out there, you're enjoying the cheap prices between $6 and $14 a month for your services, they're going to go up. Now, Netflix, has managed to keep its entry-level price at $7 until just this year, and now is offering a cheaper mobile-only service in several countries. And while shelling out for stuff from The Mandalorian to 6 Underground is already far from cheap, by the middle of the next decade, we might be wondering why that happened to the days of paying $6.99 for a Disney subscription alone. Imagine getting Pixar Plus, MCU Plus, and Star Wars Plus, virtual reality and AK add-ons. That's what we're talking about. So bundling has to come into play. We've talked about this. It's going to have to happen soon enough. So, yes, all this right now is really great, but nobody's looking at the long-term effects. When cable goes away, I'm going to tell you something. It's going to cost more for the content we're getting, because the biggest problem is that all these companies need to shell out for content. And unless the networks come into play and start trying to get involved with some of these outlets or whatnot, I don't know. But some mergers are going to have to happen, and something's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years that's really going to see where we're going to look at things. But I'll tell you what, we might be complaining about how much streaming media costs someday. But then here's the biggest problem, and this happens with every industry that's online. Piracy could come into play, and then eventually we might just see a point where all these companies, they're not going to be able to control like they used to. And there's a lot of people that are not going to go ahead and want to watch like they did with cable, where they're going to have the access to all those channels. They're not going to go and stick around to go and pay for 5, 6 different services. That's not going to happen either. So that's a lot to can absorb. These are the kind of things you want to think about when it comes to next year. When it comes to what can happen to the content of the future, and what's going to happen to the content creators of the future. Those are 2 big questions we're going to have answered coming up next year. More than you know it. So keep all that in mind. We're going to leave it right there. And it's time to go ahead and take ourselves into the second part of my last interview for this year with sportscasting legend Ann Liguori here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Let's go and give you 30 more minutes of my fascinating conversation with the person behind Sports Interviews, Ann Liguori. And when it comes to radio, Lee Abrams actually wrote out a Facebook post, most recently, the radio consultant that did a lot of work in the late 70s, early 80s with radio stations, music radio. But I think he's talked about the deregulation and the issues that we have where character and personality have been so much stripped from what you have right now today in radio, because people don't realize that's not the way to go and compete with digital, that you can still win, but you have to have content and you have to have people that deliver the content well. So you need experts and veterans that have good character. They have personalities. They are entertaining. But even the young entertainers now will not go to radio as an outlet. They don't want to do that. But like I said, at your station, the WFAN, again, Mike and the Mad Dog, those guys barking at each other all day long. John Sterling, who was one of my favorite baseball announcers, with Susan Walmart. They're great doing Yankees baseball. Talk to me about, you had a zoo of characters in that building, and you got to work with them each and every week.
Well, yeah, they're not really, obviously physically not in the building. Susan was the first person on FAN. She started as an update anchor.
Right.
And so she was the first voice on the Wednesday, July 1st, 1987, when the station started. 2020. And then, she held different positions and then became, the Yankees announcer. And CBS had the Yankees for many, many years. And FAN got the rights to the Yankees a number of years ago. So so officially, she's just, she's back on our station. Mike and the Mad Dog were there, not even at the beginning. They weren't originals, but they came on about 2 years into the station's history. And, it was just an interesting contrast of personalities and mix. And that was a special show, no doubt.
Because
so through
Florida,
the years,
you hear about these, like where I went in Florida, we would hear about it because, number one, before the Marlins came into baseball here, we had the Yankees. We would have the Yankees, the Cubs, and the Mets on the weekends. We would get to watch their games and in some cases hear the games as well. So I got to hear about John's and Henry called Yankees win kind of deal. And also had friends from New York who would always talk about that. Or they talk about Mike and the Mad Dog. Oh, you guys don't have it like we have it up there. Mike and the Mad Dog and all this thing. So it was really imagine if it would have been online and people could have heard it back then. It would have been amazing.
Right. Well, there was a lot of special, FAN, we were the first. So, it produced through the years just very special programming. Don Imus in the morning. Yes. That was a great show. Pete Franklin was the original afternoon drive guy. Remember Pete Franklin? He came out of my hometown, Cleveland, Ohio. So through the years, it really, basically focused on incredible personalities, sports experts who just know how to talk to New Yorkers for sure.
Yeah. And,
at a time, there's a lot of clutter now on the airwaves. So that at the time, for many, many years, you could pick up the signal, 660 AM, up and down the eastern seaboard, as far south as probably Miami, and as far north as Canada. That's changed a little bit now.
No, totally.
But, it's just a skill. To this day, it's a very powerful vehicle. I have a show that's starting on, it's going to be called Talking Golf. So I'm going to be doing a 13-week Sunday morning show on golf, which is one of my favorite sports. And that's going to start on April 5th through June 28th. And then, I'll continue to cover the Masters and the U.S. Open golf and PGA Championship and the U.S. Open tennis. So I'm looking forward to continuing on with FAN and with CBS Sports Radio Network.
Absolutely. I'm sure you probably have a couple of visits to South Florida because of all the events that go on over here. Because I'll tell you, golf down here where we're at is everything.
I know. I love Florida. I spend a lot of time in Florida in the winter. I definitely will be at the Honda Classic. I go there every year. I go to the tournament in Tampa. The whole Florida swing, Bay Hill, Arnold Palmer Invitational. So I get to spend a lot of time in Florida, which is a good thing in the wintertime.
See, that's on your schedule. That's what's smart, right? Everything's thought about. Everything's thought through. Now, that's right. Besides a remarkable run of sports, you've talked to some celebrities. And, look, they're still very relevant today. Kevin Costner, Sylvester Stallone, Charles Schultz, the curator of the Peanuts cartoons. You were also one of the first celebrity. Oh my God. First somebody on this program. First females in history to participate in the Bob Hope's Classic to play as a celebrity golfer. Really great stuff. Now, what I want to ask you is, from being an interviewer, what is the absolute one takeaway you would give aspiring broadcasters they should absolutely need to be able to do when they're preparing for any interview? This would be, even for me, I think it's very important to get that word out. What would you say that would be?
Well, I mean, I mentioned it earlier in our discussion, but one is to do as much research as you can about the person you're interviewing. And then during the interview, the art of listening. I just think a lot of times you'll see hosts on shows interrupting and not truly listening to what the guest has to say. Right. I just think listening is very important. And then, you can kind of respond and follow up with your follow-up questions based on what the guest is saying. So I really do feel that the art of a great interview is listening intensely and then reacting to, what your guest is saying and putting in the prep work. Obviously, for anything you do in life, you have to be prepared. So researching and preparation is key.
I'm just amazed by that. Now, so many great. Now, here's another question I have. This is always one thing that always is a pet peeve of mine. So many great radio talents have made the transition to television since the medium began. Many of the MCs and the hosts we see today, I feel like, on our screen, lack the radio background. I try to think of people that that originally came from radio or have radio experience. I can think of Ryan Seacrest and Steve Harvey. I can't think of anybody else, really. I guess Dan Le Batard makes that point for being on ESPN, but really there's just not much out there. And I think those are the best MCs, are those that when you're working with, without much else to work off of, radio is where you break your bones. Because, that's one thing I also think works very well for you, is because you've had all that radio experience, because it's not just the aesthetics of what you have on screen, is that it's the words you say, how you present yourself, being able to keep people, for yourself, to try to keep people engaged for 5 hours when they could be getting in and out of the car all day long on a weekend.
Right. It's ultimately the toughest format because you're on live in the number one market, New York.
Right. And
you're taking calls from all sorts of people out there, with only a 6 or 7 second delay button. So, and I'm as you say, on 5-6 hours a week. Some people are on 5-6 hours a day, which is crazy. That's a lot of work. But yeah, I think radio, the talk format in radio is the best preparation for any broadcaster for anything that they want to do. When you do sports on television, as an anchor, you're reading off a teleprompter, right? Hopefully you're writing it yourself and you're reading it off a teleprompter, but it's only for a few minutes, right? To actually host a show on radio and interview people for 5 or 6 hours at a time, that's very challenging. And I think if you can do that well, you can basically do anything. So to your point, it's a great, it's a great format to really, get to a point where you can host any kind of show. I can't think of anything that would be more difficult than hosting a call-in show. So
absolutely.
It's been a great format for me.
Right. And it's because then you're unscripted, it's ad-libbed. You're on the fly for the most part with only so much help that you have among your producers, call screeners, what have you. You're up there, and it's like you have to maintain the airways for that amount of time with only the commercials to give you a little bit of a respite. But now my question is on this is also, because for me, radio, I always thought was a great testing ground. Look at all the game shows we always watched, as kids. They're okay from radio, all of them. And even people that hosted programming for what it was. What do you see as the end-all reason for the lack of radio stars moving up the way it should be? Because maybe it's a mixture of how the corporatization of radio has, the talent pool of radio stars that are worthy to make it onto the big screen and to get onto television and to make that transition are not there. And so celebrities.
Well, I'm sure it has a lot to do with opportunities too. For me, I was kind of doing both at the same time. Well, I started actually as a journalist. And then from there, I was writing for USA Today, covering sports in New York. And at the same time, I was a producer at ABC Radio Network working with Howard Cosell and the sports talent at ABC Radio Network. And, basically I was trying to earn enough money to pay the rent, right? So I was freelancing and doing a variety of jobs. But by doing that variety, I was getting a lot of experience in print, radio, and then eventually I got into television. So to me, it was kind of putting it all together and trying to get as much experience in front of the camera and behind the camera so I could do anything in the business, right? But as I say, a lot of people have different approaches. You really have to go where the jobs are. And if you can get into radio, that's wonderful. Some people want to go right for television because, especially they come out of college and they think it's so glamorous that they want to be on TV. As we know, it's not always a glamorous business, right? But
right.
I think a lot of people, really kind of pursue television. Also, it pays more than radio for the most part, right? So they go where the jobs are that pay the most money if they're fortunate enough to get those kind of positions. So those are some of the reasons why perhaps more and more people kind of bypass radio and go right for television.
But I mean, my thing is, yes, I've heard the phrase radio is a cruel mistress because it's so fun to do, but how much money is there really in it to do it? So, but for me, I just feel like there's a point where with radio hosts that are out there, getting the opportunity to go forward, I wish there was just, I don't know. I mean, I didn't realize so much about your work or your background besides your radio work. I didn't realize you did USA Today and ABC Radio. And you did all that extra work because that's so much groundwork you did to work your way up there. You did not inherit.
Sure. I mean, you don't just start. You just don't start on air. I mean, a lot of people don't start in New York, and I started basically right out of college. I earned a fellowship with the International Radio and TV Society (IRTS), which brought me right to New York City, and I stayed here after the program ended. It was a great program. I highly recommend it for any students to apply for it. They pick between 20 and 30 graduates to come right to New York and learn from some of the giants in the industry. And that's how I learned. I came in under their fellowship program, but I stayed in New York. And it's a tough place to stay because it's the most expensive city really in the country, right? So, and I didn't have any friends or family here when I stayed. So, I was going through a tragedy of losing my brother. He was only 22 to leukemia as well. So, there were a lot of trying circumstances when I came to New York. But basically, I dove into work and started freelancing for a number of companies, and that gave me a lot of experience. As I said, I was at ABC Radio Sports Network as a producer, freelance producer, and I covered every team in New York. And while I was covering every team in New York, I was not only interviewing the athletes and getting to know the personalities, the teams and the players, but also seeing what the sponsorships in sports were all about. So that helped me when I began selling Sports Interview Show. So all these opportunities, all this experience comes into play with everything you do, right? So my advice to young people, don't worry if you're starting out as a production assistant. I mean, you're not going to start out as an on-air personality. You're not going to get a major show to host right off, right out of the gates, basically. There's different, you can turn every experience in the business into a worthwhile learning experience. And you put a number of those things together, and before you know it, you have a good resume on your hands. So it all, the more experience you can get in, sales and distribution and production and different areas of the business, the better if, to pursue on-air work, because you're just more familiar with what's going on, and you'll be better overall.
I'm amazed you just blew my mind. First of all, you also have been working in the number one market this whole time.
I came up here right out of college and haven't left.
and also you just mentioned Howard Cosell. So that means if you worked at ABC Radio at the time I'm thinking of, that means you were around this. I mean, that was when ABC Radio was a monster, because you had WABC just coming off of that. And I remember they had the Super Radio project they started as well. And so I can imagine the people you probably worked around that area on top of that, because that was just so much good content.
Those were the days. Those were the days when there were only, 5 or 6 major sports personalities, and Howard Cosell was one of them. So people shook in their shoes when he walked down the hallway. And I remember one of my first days on the job. He had done his commentary in the morning, and my shift had started at 11, so he was already out of the building. But his commentary was going to be repeated later in the afternoon, and he had said something inaccurate. He had said something wrong. I can't remember what it was because it was so long ago. This was in the probably mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And all I know is that I insisted on finding his home number from the engineer and calling him at home to get him to redo that one line so I could edit it so it would be 100% accurate, so that we could send it out again in the afternoon to all the hundreds of ABC affiliates, and it would be 100% good, right? So I find his phone number, but the engineer said, "There's no way you're going to call Howard at home." I said, "Yes, I am. It's my job as a producer to get this right." So my poor engineer, I can just see his face right now. He was just like, "Oh my God." They were so intimidated by the great Howard Cosell, but
right.
Being just a young freelance producer, I thought, that's the only way I couldn't think of it going out not perfect, right?
Right.
So we call him at home. I had no idea he was even going to be there, but, that iconic voice picked up the phone. And I said,
wow.
He said, "Hello." And I said, "Mr. Cosell, my name is Ann Liguori. I'm just starting here at ABC Radio Sports. You don't know me, but you said something wrong in your commentary that went out this morning. And can you redo that one line, and I'll edit it in, and it would be great." And there was this long pause, and you heard this just iconic, legendary voice. "Do you know who I am, young lady? This is Howard Cosell. I don't make mistakes." So now, what do I say after that? What's my comeback line, right?
Oh.
Literally, the engineer in the studio was about to fall out of his chair. He was just so scared. And I thought, well, I better come up with a good line, or I might not be working in the business ever again. So I just basically said that, "Mr. Cosell, normally you're flawless, but you did say this, and you meant to say that. So you want it to be perfect, right?" And you could just hear him, just kind of making all kinds of weird noises. And he finally redid it, and that was it. But he never forgot my name, and we always had great conversations after that. He respected me, so I earned his respect, and basically, stood up to him and made sure he got it right, which is what a producer's supposed to do, right?
That's go-getting.
I thought you'd enjoy my Howard Cosell story.
No, that was great. My God. But again, and I just remember, I've heard a lot of air checks at WABC back in the day where he'd have the sports commentary on and Dan Ingram would love to go ahead and rail against Howard Cosell and kind of pick on him on a regular basis. And I thought that was hilarious how that would happen. So I can imagine, and Howard's not necessarily not like a lovable fuzzball. He's got some rough edges, but damn good broadcaster. I love him. I thought he was great. He was amazing. It was great to watch him work because, he would do his commentary in 60 seconds and he wouldn't need a stopwatch. He would just know when to stop. He was such a great orator, being a former lawyer. He just had those incredible timing skills and speaking skills. So he was just a pleasure to watch, and certainly a character at that. Now I got to ask you this: another great voice. Maybe you were in the same building with him. Did you ever get to rub shoulders with Paul Harvey?
No, I never knew Paul Harvey. Harvey was based in Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
But yeah. I did meet him, at various broadcasting dinners, and yeah, he was just an iconic voice for sure. He was a legend, and rightly so. He just was talk about timing and delivery. Few people did it better than Paul Harvey, that's for sure.
Oh, I miss his commentaries. It would be, honestly, that was one of those things where you'll never get another guy like him. Never, ever again.
Right. He had such a distinct style and personality. Absolutely. And his writing was great. And, his points were just so thought out. And, everything about him was just perfection.
Well, Ann, I could talk to you about this all day. I want to take a minute and talk about your off-camera work, your projects, because, there's so much here. Let me just try to compartmentalize this as much as I can. You're the author of the book, A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game. You have created your own Hamptons Rope Collection jewelry line, which looks really great. And you can find it at DUNE-jewelry.com. And then you also, Bob Hope can have his Celebrity Golf Classics, which were great at the time. And now you also host your own golf classic each year in the Hamptons, supporting the Ann Liguori Foundation, a 501c3 public charity with a mission to raise funds and awareness for non-for-profits who work in the field of cancer prevention and cancer care. That's incredible work. Talk to me about, first of all, having the time to go and put all this together and organize it, and, what you decide to put yourself into in your off time.
Right. I know. It sounds like I do a lot of different things. Well, the book, A Passion for Golf, Celebrity Musings About the Game, is a compilation of interviews that I did from that show, Conversations with Ann Liguori, that aired on the Golf Channel. We didn't talk too much about that yet, but, I was also one of the original hosts on the Golf Channel with a weekly primetime show.
Right. And,
it took, 10 years for people to even know about the Golf Channel. In fact, Cablevision on Long Island didn't carry the Golf Channel in the early days. So I just thought the interviews were very interesting about the success stories of all these personalities who have a passion for golf, whether they were sports legends like Jim Brown or Sugar Ray Leonard or Johnny Bench or Pete Sampras, musicians like Amy Grant, Smokey Robinson, Vince Gill.
Wow.
Celine Dion. I got people like Matthew McConaughey, Joe Pesci. It's just all different kinds. Kevin Costner, Stallone, all those personalities were booked for this primetime show that aired on the Golf Channel. So that's how the book got done. Then, since we talked about, I lost my brother to leukemia, and a year before that, I lost my dad to cancer. So I used to do an annual charity tournament for the American Cancer Society. And that grew into being able to support a number of other organizations that focus on cancer research, cancer prevention, and cancer care. And so about 10 years ago, I put my own foundation together, and we do just that. And so every June, I host an annual charity golf tournament at a prestigious golf course in the Hamptons. We have such great golf out here, as you know, on the east end of Long Island. And on June 25th next year, 2020, the tournament will be held at the Maidstone Club, which is just a beautiful, exclusive golf course in East Hampton. So I'm proud of that foundation and the work we've done to raise money and awareness for cancer prevention and cancer research. And that's, based on a great committee and my, great tournament coordinator, we've been able to put this event together now for 22 straight years. So I do things that I'm passionate about, and I really do believe in giving back too, because that's so important.
Again, that's the epitome of content creation. Really, you have made the most of everything, all the opportunities you've had, and I'm really just amazed at just the ambition that you have. You're really forward thinking, and also one thing is to be said about again, you've taken a couple of risks in your career, from calling Howard Cosell to correct a mistake to working on WFAN, which could have very well not gone well with all said and done. I mean, I'm sure you would have definitely, landed somewhere else, but still, you worked in a lot of areas where, okay, we're going to try this ourselves. And again, finding sponsorship for your own sports interviews program, you've done a lot to really, buck the system, and really, you have been resilient in a lot of different ways, and that's incredible that you've been able to pull this off for as long as you have.
Pull it off as long as I have. Yeah, again, I mean, you have to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
I was an athlete growing up. I earned 16 letters in high school for sports every quarter, volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter, and then I doubled in track and playing number one on the boys tennis team when I was a senior in high school. So that taught me a lot. Being an athlete really taught me a lot. Obviously, it teaches you time management. It teaches you how to win, how to deal with losing, how to play with a team. You learn all kinds of, sports etiquette and leadership skills and skills that I still use today in the boardroom and in running my own company. So being an athlete was very important, and it just gave me the confidence, I think, particularly when I was, right out of college and embarking on this broadcasting career in the Big Apple, the number one market.
But wait a minute.
It just gave me a lot of confidence.
But what I didn't hear you say was you didn't let her in golf.
No, I did not learn golf until years later. In fact, I kind of had some fun playing golf as a kid here and there, but I wish I would have learned golf when I was younger, but I was so busy doing other sports.
Yeah.
Golf wasn't something, we took up when we were kids. It was more team sports, although tennis, definitely individual sport, but I love to play a lot of doubles in tennis.
Right.
But I didn't really take up golf until I was hosting this show on the Golf Channel and getting all kinds of invitations to play in these celebrity tournaments. And then I was normally the token chick at these events, the only woman back then, amongst all these guy golfers. So I knew I had to be good. I wanted to learn. So I basically started taking lessons every time. Like when I interviewed Sylvester Stallone at the Doral, I would take a lesson from Jim McClain, who was at the Learning Center there for many, many years.
Wow.
I'd interview all these incredible personalities that I would book myself to be on my show. And then I'd go to these venues to do the TV shows. And while I was there, get pointers from the pros who taught there, or the director of golf who ran the facility there. So you have to practice. So I would spend a lot of time hitting balls and just trying to get my game to a point where I could be very respectable playing in all these tournaments. And being an athlete, I think, helped. Golf is probably the most difficult sport to learn, no matter how good of an athlete you are.
Oh, I understand. I've tried.
You've tried. So I just became, so passionate about the game and almost addicted to the game. You'll hear, people who love the game so much, they just can't stop playing. So I interviewed a lot of people through the years, Alice Cooper, Lawrence Taylor, who, had serious addictions and changed their addictions from alcohol or drugs to golf.
Yeah, I still think it's amazing when Alice Cooper is on the links, and he's just he's pretty avid.
I know, the king of shock rock. Believe me, he's a wonderful guy. He's probably the person that's most surprised me of any people I've ever met, because he's so unlike his onstage persona. So, golf I didn't take up until later in life, and it's turned out to be, my lifestyle now. So
also,
it's a great sport.
Have you used golf as a type of meeting when you try to work with clients or sponsors? Did you ever use golf in that respect?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Yes. It's a 4 or 5 hour day. So a lot of times you'll play with clients and you're not supposed to talk business while you're golfing. That's what the 19th hole is for.
Right.
But golf is a great vehicle for business. No doubt about it. I do a lot of public speaking, and that's one of the topics. And, it's just a great sport. Plus it takes you to some of the most gorgeous venues around the world. I've done TV shows in Ireland, Morocco, Scotland, everywhere, France, Spain, and we're filming on golf courses that are just one's more breathtakingly beautiful than the next. So it's a great sport.
Awesome. Ann Liguori again. And again, everybody can, I want to direct listeners, you can go and look for more information at AnnLiguori.com, AnnLiguori.com. Ann, this has been so much fun. I'm so glad you came on and did my show. Thanks for making time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
So from yours truly to all of you, I really wish all of you a wonderful, happy new year. We'll talk to you in 2020 with more programming and a whole slate of things that are going to be coming up down the line that are going to make things very interesting in the world of media, and we'll keep an eye on it. So until we talk again in 2020, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.